Hello, welcome to When the Smoke Clears. I am the recovery plug. How's it going on, everybody? Hope you guys are doing great, man. I know my day's going pretty good. Well, it's Friday, man. So what's happening? But yeah, so I'm excited to get into the video today. Check this out. Today we're gonna skip on the reading of the Cosmic Power Within You to kind of just give it a little change for a second. You know what I mean? For just an episode or whatever, but I'll come back on the next episode and continue on with the book. But today I wanted to talk about, I guess, just understanding addiction at its core, and understanding how the functionality and the structure of the mind, in other words, the plasticity of the brain, which is the part of the brain that changes when you change, and off of repetitious basis type things. So yeah, but before we get started, if you would please join me in a moment of silence, followed by the serenity prayer for the addict who still suffers, and for those of us who are still in the struggle of the things that keep us bound down, all of those types of things. So if you would please join me in a moment of silence. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference. All right, well, let's get started. So, how's it going, man? You know what? Um, it, it's that question. Understanding addiction at its core. When if somebody asked me that, and somebody has, she goes, "What do you think addiction means, or how do you perceive addiction? What is addiction? How did you know that you were an addict and that sort of thing? You know what I mean? And it's just nobody really understands in the first stages that they're addicted. Nobody knows that they have a problem, because when we're born, we're as far back as I can remember, I mean, I was never an addict. You know what I mean? I was this kid who grew up in, and in the process of growing up, the environment around me was structured in this fashion that there was always alcohol involved. There was always drugs involved in my life, and things that I saw as a little kid. And I could remember in being a young kid, and I could remember my dad, always drinking. From sun up to sundown, he had a beer in his hand all the time. It was like part of his wardrobe. You know what I mean? And I could remember going to my grandparents' house, whether it was my mom's side or my father's side. And again, my grandfathers always had a drink in their hand. You know what I mean? So to me, it was normality. When I got a little bit older as a kid, I would remember being at little drinking functions, if you would, that my dad and my uncles would have. And then I could remember there being marijuana in that environment. And not only a little bit, not only just one cigarette, I'm talking trash bags full of marijuana. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I got introduced to all of those types of things, but I wasn't an addict. You know what I mean? I was just a little kid. I was just a little kid growing up in the, barrio, if you would, maybe later on in the suburbs, if you would, you know what I mean? And it's just, that was just a way of life. It was normal to me. And I could remember at a very young age when there was when there was things going on as far as myself and things that I was going through at the particular point in time in my life as a kid, and going through this trauma that no kid should be going through. And I found at an early age that when I would go and get drinks for my uncles, for my dad, you know, they would have an empty one but still had some in it, and me and my cousins would drink it, just playing around, you know what I mean? And then we finally one day got a full beer, and we had opened it, and we started drinking it, and we were playing, we were playing as if we were my uncles and my dad and my grandfather. We were playing. We used to call it bar. Okay, let's play bar. And at first we used to make all these little different concoctions with pickle juice and just pepper and jalapeno juice, and just daring each other to drink the shot, right? And we were little kids, and but when we got to that moment when there was a beer there and we opened it and decided to drink it, I could remember that those feelings that I had, because they were on me all the time, they went away. And I was in the first grade when that happened, and I understood that if I took this, and then it wasn't long after that I started doing that drink that we decided that we were going to start smoking those cigarettes that they had. And in turn there, they just happened to be marijuana cigarettes. And, we would sneak a couple of, the pieces that were just laid out in the ashtray, I guess they call them roaches, right? And we used to sneak the roaches and smoke those. And I could remember I was in the first grade, and smoking that roach and drinking that alcohol and drinking that beer gave me this just feeling of just like, wow, I'm good right here, you know what I mean? And I don't feel sad, I don't feel scared, I don't feel the way I felt before the alcohol and the drug. And so it wasn't until years, I'm talking years later, as an adult, that I understood that, okay, maybe this person has a problem, right? And when I got older and, was in school, and then started understanding what are the effects of alcohol and drugs and so on and so forth, through health and through biology class and science class and all those things. And at that particular point in time when I was still in school, it was the whole just say no with the Reagans. When Mr. Reagan was president, and his wife Nancy Reagan had the slogan "Just say no," and then they had Mothers Against drunk drivers, and all of this stuff started educating you, that I found that I started understanding the effects and what it is and what could happen when you consume these things. And I still didn't think that I was an addict, and so it wasn't until years later after that, because by that time I'm about 18 or whatever, and it was just years and years later of abuse that I landed in a treatment center, and then understood, okay, yeah, you're addicted. But if you listen to the story, it is not, you're not addicted because you're just wake up and you're like that, or you're just born an addict, that type of thing. No, I mean, it's not like that. It's got more to do, and it's got everything to do, I believe, with a lot of factors. There's quite a few factors that are involved here, and it's going to be what type of environment do you come from? What kind of environment or is your background? What is your culture, your nationality, the your how you were raised. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into. Um, it's almost like this. You can even probably make um, this list and check a checkoff list and say, okay, well, if your family did this, if you came from this, or if you did from that, and you just start checking these off, and if you find out that your most of that page is checked off, well, then the probability of you becoming an addict is going to be pretty high. So, going back to the question, understanding addiction at its core, and that is one of the things that we have to understand. Addiction at its core comes from everything that you did, that you came from, that you were involved in your life prior to you coming into that question, or prior to you being in a treatment center, or prior to you deciding, does my friend need help, or does my dad need help, my mom, or do I, or whatever, right? And you just have to backtrack through your life in a sense, dissecting your heritage, in a sense, and your background. You know what I mean? Because that absolutely has everything to do with the probability of you becoming an addict. You know what I mean? And for myself, I mean, my dad was an alcoholic and a drug addict. He died at the age of 55 from alcohol and drugs. So I know this too well. You know what I mean? I mean, it's sad to say that, I can remember being in a room with my dad and doing lines of cocaine with him. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just how I was brought up. And it was not frowned upon for the males in the families to drink or do drugs, because that's just, you if you work and you provide, then you have every right to do whatever you want, in that sense. You know what I mean? And that's just the way it was. That's how I grew up. That was my environment. That was my culture. That was my heritage. You know what I mean? And it goes back all the way to my grandfathers. You know what I mean? My grandfathers drank. They drank substantially. You know what I mean? And whether they did drugs or not, I have no idea. I don't remember any of that, but I do know that they drank a lot. And a lot of my uncles, you know what I mean? A lot of my uncles I know, they drink and still do, and use drugs, and some of them still do. You know what I mean? And I got cousins the same way. You know what I mean? So it is not something that I'm proud of to say about my family, because I understand now the the hardship, I guess, the problems that my family has. You know what I mean? Including myself. You know what I mean? It's heartbreaking to me to know that my grandfather may have been drinking because something emotionally was wrong with him. He was, something, he had some sort of trauma, perhaps. You know what I mean? Because he grew up in the Depression. You know what I mean? And both my grandparents, you know what I mean, both sides. And then my mom and dad, you know what I mean. I could understand my dad. I didn't find out until years later through a friend of his that my dad went through some pretty serious trauma as a kid. You know what I mean? He had his best friend that was shot right in front of him. You know what I mean? And I'm just as a kid, and you go through something like that, that's got to be, and then that particular person knows my dad really well, and You know, he was like, yeah, from then he drank a lot, and I could understand why. And you know, back then that was like in the 50s or whatever. You know what I mean? And the 50s and the early 60s when he was, you know, young, and it was there's, you know, at that particular time there was no help like there is today. You know what I mean? And you know, those kind of things weren't brought up into the forefront as far as, you know, especially for males. You know what I mean? You were considered weak if you did anything like that. So yeah, and you know, the understanding the addiction at its core, and it's understanding those types of things. You know what I mean? Just remember that addicts aren't addicts because they were just, you know, they woke up one day and say, okay, I'm an addict now. No, there's much deeper things that go along with that, and a lot has to do with the trauma of different things in their life. And you know, people are different. You know what I mean? People are different, and they can they react and adapt differently. And going on with that, you know, the what I mentioned about the brain having something to do, or a lot to do with actually with how an addict can recover. You know what I mean? And you know, recovery is tough. You know what I mean? That I can tell you from experience. Recovery is tough, man. There's recovery is not a cakewalk. You know what I mean? Recovery is not a cakewalk, man. And it is a hard thing to do. You know what I mean? Man, my last treatment center when I was there, I get probably the people who got out with me. I could say that probably out of everybody that I've seen so far, I think probably, actually, I don't know any, well, I do, two of us that I know that are still sober today. That's myself and a fella by the name of Patrick. He's still, we're at Pay It Forward down in San Antonio, Texas. So shout out to you, Patrick. What's happening, my brother? And he's, you know, you know, working on being a rev or something, a pastor or something. And man, that's right on with that, man. I'm happy for him, man. I'm really, him and his kids. You know what I mean? I'm really happy that he's on a good and spiritual and positive journey. I just wish that all of us, the rest of us who went through that treatment center, could be on that same in that same journey. But you know, going back to the brain and the neuroplasticity of the brain is the neuroplasticity is there's two parts to it, and it's a functional plasticity and the structural plasticity. Okay, and the functional plasticity it involves the shifts in how your brain operates, right? And it's like let me see, let me look at my notes here. It's okay, yeah, it's the function when it involves shifts in how the brain operates, and it's like doing something on the repetitive basis. You know what I mean? If say you get a ball and you throw it, you know what I mean? The neuroplasticity or the functional plasticity of your brain, it knows that you just pick it up and you release, you move your arm and you release the ball. Now, if you do this on a repetitive basis and then get some structure into it, which is the structural plasticity part, in other words, you find a target now. You have this hole that you see in the distance 20 yards out. Now the object for view is getting that ball and making it through that hole. Well, if you throw it the first time, you're probably going to miss. The probability of you making that is pretty low. You know what I mean? And the way that the function and the structural plasticity of your brain starts meshing and working together is by throwing this ball on a repetitive basis. In other words, you're practicing. And the more you practice, eventually you're going to be able to throw that every single time and make it just about. You know, the probability gets really high when you practice long enough, right? So in turn there, now the structural and functional plasticity of your brain has changed because you can do that. You know what I mean? You and I have the ability to do that. And how great is that? You know what I mean? So, and at first it's not going to be happy. It's not going to be all good. And you're going to be getting tired throwing this ball. You're going to be getting frustrated because you've thrown it so many times. But the more you do it, you will get better at it. You know what I mean? I always like to use that analogy of Larry Bird. You know, Larry Bird was I don't know how many world time championship in the NBA, and he was this 3-point, guru guy. He was like the GOAT for 3-pointers, right? And he could just make them, But his thing was that he said that he would shoot 500 baskets, 3-pointers every single day. Every single day I guess he started when he was in high school or something, but every single day he shot 500 3-pointers. Can you imagine that? Waking up every morning shooting. So if you get up every morning, you're throwing this ball into that little ring 500 times a day, guess what? You too will become a master at it and a champion, man. I can guarantee you that. So it's the same thing as working on your addiction or whatever is type of addiction or whatever problems are bounding you down, whether it's addiction, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's childhood traumatic experiences, depression, anger, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. It can change. All you have to do is mentally go through the motions and say, it's just kind of a process. We'll probably get into that in another video, but just for time's sake here, if you practice enough, that's why it's always said in these meetings that you can attend for AA or NA, that or any peer support group, but for that matter, that to keep coming back. You know what I mean? If you keep going back and you keep doing that type of lifestyle, involving yourself in that type of stuff every single day, well then guess what? You start becoming a product of your environment. You know what I mean? So it's just like, when I was in the addiction, I stayed in the addiction. You know what I mean? I relapsed for 5 years and I stayed there. I was in the streets, in the motels, in the tent communities, going from one bando to the next, just doing nothing good. Just involving myself in that type of thing, hanging out with those types of people, with other addicts and other people who are doing illegal things, then that is going to be what I'm going to be doing. You know what I mean? So not until I changed that did I have success at overcoming the addiction. And I can honestly tell you that I'm here today, sitting doing this video podcast, clean and sober and happy. You know what I mean? I feel great, and I'm grateful for the fact that I get a second chance, and I'm grateful with the fact that I'm able to share a message with you guys. You know what I mean? So, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for lasting this long with me on the video. But I guess that's gonna be. I'm going to close the video out, and we'll get on to a different subject, or maybe the same subject, who knows, on the next video, or I'll probably wind up keep continuing on the cosmic power within you reading until we're done with it. So I just wanted to give a little different video out today, just kind of move the monotony a little bit. You know what I mean? Change it up, this and that. Throw a little bit of salt and pepper in there. You know what I mean? So yeah, but it's all good, and I'm glad that you guys are able to hear me out. So hopefully this video helps somebody, and I'm thankful that you guys listened. And if you would please give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, share my channel, because the only way to help people, and that's the whole point of doing the video podcast, is to help somebody. It gives somebody that spark, somebody that drive, somebody that nudge in the first step to recovery, spirituality, and positivity, man. Because it's great to be on this side of that of the fence. You know what I mean? So. Thank you again for sharing my channel. Just know that when you do hit that subscribe button, it doesn't cost you a thing, and you'll be helping out another veteran, another homeless person, another person dealing with PTSD, childhood traumatic experience, drug addiction, suicidal thoughts, anger, and depression, my friends, because I have dealt with all those things at one point in time in my life. And yeah, so I'm a living testimony that you can and get out and live a spiritual and positive and productive life, man. So yeah, if you would please, I guess that's gonna be it. So I guess until the next time, when the smoke clears, I am the recovery plug.